We're here with Samantha Lefebvre. Samantha, why is science important for you?
Science is important to me because it's involved in everyday life. For example, with all the animals you grew up with. When I was a kid, I had this caterpillar that I ended up trapping in a little enclosure, and I wanted to see it turn into a butterfly, but it never ended up working because, science. I was a kid, didn't know much about science. So it made me more interested in finding out how butterflies would develop into different beings and how they got their colors on their wings and stuff, and how they'd make their cocoons and everything to just survive.
Science is really important for me because I've always been a person that has been always curious about the universe and the human body. Even when I was a kid, I used to ask questions as oh, why does that happen? The answer for most of the things, it's really interesting, and there's different type of science. There's biology, there's chemistry. You always learn something new. And there's different theories and all, and it's just something I have always been passionate about.
Well, science is important to me because I think it gives an opportunity and the experience for young people, or even people of any age, to explore and learn about science and how people and Earth and the universe is built off of science. So I really think it's a good learning experience for kids to understand who they are and what they are.
Because we've not only developed as humans, but we've also developed with the environment. We have telephones, we have service, we have so many things. I think it's just great that science can do so much for us as humans.
For me, science is a way to explain life. I was initially very interested in health sciences, so it's important because it explains everything that happens around you in the environment and your body. I know it's just a very interesting subject for me.
I've always been passionate about science, and in the future I really want to go into a field where we practice and research skin cancer or anything that is related to skin. I fell in love with it because I love skincare and anything that is skin related.
Science has always been important in my life in general. I've always been intrigued and fascinated by just science, and you can combine the aspect of social science, which is us as humans, and then you have the deeper science of the biology, how our bodies work and how that's all connected, and the fascinating field and the circle of science in our day-to-day lives. So I think science just impacts me, how I act and how my body reacts and how everything on this earth is science. So I'm grateful for science because without science, we wouldn't be here. So that's how science impacts me and what science is for me.
I grew up very interested in science, and of course without science I wouldn't even have this interest. And I'm a very logical person, and I really like to know facts about my surroundings and how, for example, my body was constructed, so my cells and just everything in between.
What's your first experience with science and how did you fall in love with it?
My first experience with science was probably when I made a volcano in 7th grade for my science project. Not really scientific, just a little bit of baking soda and vinegar, and then fountain of explosion in my gym at my old school. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
My first experience with science was in school. We had a science class, and we basically used to do a lot of experiment, school project, which I thought were really interesting. It just made me want to learn more about it.
My first experience with science was a little did you know books, the little fact books about science and stuff. And so those really started my love of science because it really itched the curious part of my brain and gave me the answers to all the science questions I had. And from that point on, it really evolved my love into science into something bigger.
I fell in love with it because I was looking for a program in college to choose. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I was going with science. I was choosing science, but I didn't know what program to take. And then I started taking bio this year, and I immediately fell in love with it. My teacher was great at it, and she explained me so much, and I learned so much with it. And so I think it's just great to be a part of a program next year.
I remember my grade 9 teacher being very hands-on. He would make experiments in the classroom and demonstrations, and he would make stuff explode. And for me, it was so fascinating. And it was always a link to explaining how things work. And that was my first experience. I guess that's where I was like, I need to explain things to myself now. So, yeah.
So my first experiences were really like science classes at school. I fell in love with it when I started going to the science fairs, and where I learned how to do like different science experiment, and I really fell in love with it when I started doing labs.
Ever since I was a child, I've always been fascinated by science, and my family and stuff have helped me. Like I've done many summer camps at University of Ottawa in biology and stuff, and just my favorite class at school was science. I was always really good in science, and ever since I was a kid, my parents always explained to me how our bodies works, how everything works, and I was always so fascinated by that. So ever since I was young, just it hold an impact on me, and I just really like it, and especially now as a woman and for Women's Science Day, I like so many impact, especially as a child, to be raised in a world surrounded by women in science and doctors and chemists and so many important people in the field of science, social science, and physical science are women. So I'm very grateful that we have such a beautiful day to be grateful for this in our day-to-day lives.
Well, it's actually a funny story. So when I was 7 years old, me and my siblings, we got our first computer. I started playing this game about being a doctor and doing surgeries, and other games like identifying cells and the organs in the cells, and about ecosystems. So I started being very, very interested. So growing up, I would read books about, like, for example, the human body and how different parts of it works. Like, for example, how cells multiply, basically how the human body works, how ecosystems are formed, and what makes each ecosystem different and unique.
And why did you want to work in this career?
So the career I want to go into is environmental science, and it's an important career for me specifically because I think climate change is an important cause that's happening in the world right now, and it's not talked about enough or taken seriously enough. So I really want to go into this field because it gives me the opportunity to give a voice to people who want to talk about climate change and to kids who want to make a difference.
So I'm going as a therapy respiratory. I think that's how you say it. It's basically how you do CPR, and you learn people how to breathe properly, or if they have difficulties breathing. It's just great because I fell in love with it because one of my coworkers introduced me to this, and I think it's just great for people who can actually survive while having diagnostic with anything related to breathing.
I'm a phys ed fanatic, so I love the physical activity aspect. So for me, it was biology applied to the human body. It was a passion of mine. I was into sports and physiology, biomechanics. That's just the way it fell for me.
Because it's kind of the only thing I'm really passionate about, so I'm really excited for the future.
Since I was a little kid, I was always interested in science and the human body, and so I've always wanted to be a doctor. I also love to go to a science class at school, and I learned a lot about it. So yeah, I've always wanted to pursue a career in medicine and to help people with my knowledge.
I've always been a person who has a very kind heart. I've always been keen to helping people, and like social science, social worker, just helping people using mental science as an example of just how you can help someone, and just the science of helping, and social science and the world that revolves us, and society, and just everything in general of I just want to help people in using social science.
How do you feel working in a male-dominated field?
I think it's somewhat difficult to work in any science, math, or any STEM field for women especially, because historically women have been the underdogs in this field, and oftentimes their ideas or their inventions have been stolen by men, or their experiences and stuff like that have been stolen by their male counterparts. And I think there's a lot of stigma behind women in these STEM fields. So it's a difficult experience for women, non-binary people everywhere, just because they're just getting introduced to this field because they weren't allowed to before. Or even if they were in the field, they were often pushed aside because the men's opinion was always more important. And still today, I see it in my classes, in my school, in the fields that I'm going into, that men's opinion matters more because usually they talk louder, they have stronger opinions than women. So it's difficult, but I do think it's important that women and non-binary folks start going into this field to prove to the men and to everyone out there that they do have a voice and is just as smart and educated as any male's voice.